What you're going to see is a performance of a correspondence between two men, C.G. Jung and Father Victor White. Victor White is a Dominican priest and a scholar, a theologian, and he's very interested in making contact with Jung and possibly opening up a dialogue between theology and psychology.
Blackfriars, Oxford, the 3rd of August, 1945. Dear Professor Jung, although I've never had the honor to meet you outside of my dreams, I'm taking the very great liberty of sending you some of my writings on your psychology written from a Catholic point of view. I do wish we could somehow resolve this deadlock of privatio boni, evil as a privation of the good.
My dear Victor, as you see, I avail myself of your kind permission to call you by your first name. I hope you will reciprocate by calling me CG, which is the current designation of my unworthy positive. Some powerful thoughts are still flickering like lightnings in a summer night. Yet they are not mine. They belong to God as everything else which bears mentioning.
And then, as their correspondence develops, an anima figure appears, magically and mysteriously, and she brings with her a lot of charm and synchronicity. They refer to her as the Soror Mystica.
I had a vision of Jung lying in bed with 12 people kneeling around him in the position of the 12 hours of the clock. Each one was praying intently, and without the efforts of any single one of them, the circle or mandala of prayer would have been incomplete.
And then, because we had to cut out a lot of passages, we have a narrator to help you keep the storyline together.
Hearing about White's accident, Jung still refrained from contacting his former friend. But at his birthday in 1959, Jung received a greeting from an unexpected source, the mother prioress of a contemplative community, who was one of White's dearest friends in England. Her letter touched Jung deeply. In their last brief exchange of letters, Jung and White tried again to resolve the debate between them. But White's illness advanced rapidly, and Jung soon recognized he could only send some reconciling words of farewell.
Very quickly took him into his inner circle, and people were surprised at how easily Victor White was brought into the closest intimate contact with Jung. In fact, there was a lot of jealousy and envy and rivalry because people would have given their eye teeth to be invited out to Bolingen for a weekend to spend with Jung. And immediately after the correspondence began, Jung invited Victor White to spend 2 weeks, solid 2 weeks with him in Bolingen, discussing theology and psychology. And Victor White writes back to him, says, "This is my idea of heaven." He couldn't believe how Jung was receiving him. I think the second letter that Jung wrote to him, he says, "You are my white raven," playing on his name, White. And Jung had been waiting for a theologian, and for a masterful theologian, a top first-class theologian, and he thought he really found that one in this Oxford scholar, this Dominican priest, Victor White. Victor White was extremely intelligent and a rigorous thinker, and with a superb education in his area. And so Jung was also eager to make contact with him and to have these dialogues, and And then, in fact, when the Jung Institute in Zurich was founded in 1947, Jung sponsored White as one of the founding members of the Jung Institute, put him right in the middle of the structure, the power structure, so I think White felt very blessed in those early years. And when you look at this relationship as it developed, you could say between 1945 and 1948, that early period, it really was a honeymoon period for both of them. They were getting to know each other. White, after the war had ended, now had access to all of Jung's works. He could read them. He could talk to Jung about them. They went back and forth. Every year he came to Bolingen and visited with him. Jung brought him into the Eros conferences in Ascona in August. Every year Jung was there between 1933 and 1953 or 4, something like that. And so he brought him right beside him. And Victor White really benefited from that and thrived and felt that he had really landed in an ideal spot for himself. But that honeymoon period started fading around 1948 when Victor White really started addressing the hard subjects that would come up between them, where Jung's psychology and traditional Catholic theology really do not see eye to eye. Jung was you could say, a post-Christian man. He looked on Christian religion as more or less having run its course unless it could really transform itself and integrate what it had rejected and repressed, the shadow and the feminine. Unless it could do that, Jung felt it really was, it had lived for 2,000 years and it had run its course and it was more or less at its end. He was post-mythological in his thinking. He was post-theological. He really was a psychologist. And so he would take the doctrines of the church very seriously, but he sees them as archetypal images. He sees them as manifestations of the human psyche. He doesn't see them as ultimate truth. And Victor White, coming from theology and from revelation and from Thomism, got into serious struggles because Jung was interpreting, for instance, the doctrine of God very differently from the way the Catholic Church puts forward the revelation of the reality of God. Jung wanted to see, the God image as a polarity, a combination of the opposites: masculine, feminine, good, evil. And of course, the traditional Catholic Church would have nothing to do with that. That was heresy, anathema. And so Victor White started bringing up these subjects, and in some letters he would start correcting Jung and saying that Jung was making mistakes. In some letters he said that, or in some of his critiques, he said that Jung had the theological understanding of a kindergartner, or he didn't know the first thing about serious theology. And of course, Jung took great offense at this, and then they had their arguments, and in the end they ended up really kind of hurting each other's feelings as well as disagreeing intellectually. It became I'd say the period from 1948 to 1955 is serious dialogue, and that ends with a kind of rancorous break after Jung's outrageous book, in White's view, outrageous book, Answer to Job, was published and translated into English, and Victor White had to answer people's questions. What does Jung mean by this sentence and that sentence? Made him very uncomfortable as a Catholic priest, and so he wrote a very, very nasty, vituperative, angry review of Answer to Job in the Blackfriars magazine, and Jung read that and was seriously wounded by some of the things that Victor White was saying. And so over Answer to Job, they really had more than a serious dispute. I think they had a falling out.